Good evening. Hi. I'm Annie Leahy, and I'm the Executive Director of Mechanics Hall, and I want to begin the evening by welcoming you all to our historic building, completed in 1857, which sits on the land of the Wabanaki people. We are so grateful to see all of you here, and to those who are watching our live stream, we're thankful for your generous support of this program tonight. I also want to thank our terrific partners, Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance, Print, a bookstore, who will be selling copies of this book and many of other Lily's books this evening. And a special thanks to Deb Seeger and Justina Batchelor at Grove Atlantic for helping to make tonight's live stream possible. Can I ask by a show of hands, how many of you were here for Lily's book launch for Writers and Lovers on March 3rd, 2020? Okay. So you might remember that Lily, marveling at the full capacity audience, suggested in her opening comments that it might be the last gathering in a while. And I think it's safe to say that we are all quite sorry at how very right you were, Lily. Something like that could certainly make a person think twice about coming back. And so thank you for wanting to return to Mechanics Hall to launch 5 Tuesdays in Winter, and for trusting us to create a space in which we can safely return in person, albeit on a smaller scale, to celebrate this book and you. The pandemic isn't over. Along with science and vaccines, what indeed continues to save us all is art and literature. And this collection of short stories is proof. While reading this book, I can't tell you how often one sentence or phrase punctured my heart, transported me to a world beyond the one so many of us have been living for the last 19 months, and made me feel connected to things bigger, smaller, and truly meaningful. If you have not yet had a chance to read today's smoking hot New York Times review of 5 Tuesdays in Winter, critic Megan O'Grady sums up that sentiment this way: in our time of anxiety and isolation, King writes stories to curl up in, by which I mean they afford us something rarely celebrated in literature: comfort. This book is an extraordinary gift by an extraordinary writer during an extraordinary moment in time. Please join me in thanking and welcoming a dear friend to Mechanics Hall and to me, Lily King.
Thank you so much, Annie. That was really, really lovely. It is strange to be exactly at this same little desk, same room, different configuration. Thank you all so much for coming, for braving it all. Thank you to Annie and to really everybody at Mechanics Hall, and thank you so much to Print, Emily and Rachel and everyone at Print, and also Gibson, Faye LeBlanc, and everybody at MWPA. It takes a whole team to create something like this, and I'm really, really grateful. Let's see. So yes, as Annie said, we were all standing here. I was, and some of you were here a year and 8 months ago, and I actually thought about wearing the exact same dress and the exact same boots. I did wear the same boots, to be honest with you, and like trying to do some kind of like crazy rewind, like in Freaky Friday when they have to go back to the Chinese restaurant and the earth shakes, and I was thinking we could just go back and start it in a different way, but I decided that was a little irrational, and so here we are, and it has been just a really, really hard time, and my heart really goes out to all of you. Oh, and all of you viewing at home too. I forgot about that part. No one has gotten out of this unscathed. So, we're here, And I'm just so kind of proud of the Portland arts community, and we're a little worse for the wear, but we are here. And I'm grateful to all of you in the writing community and the reading community and the bookstore community, and very much in particular my writers group and my husband and Calla, who are way in the back, my daughter Calla. I didn't write this book during the pandemic, so I just want to clear that up right now. I don't want you to think I was one of those creative people who actually got more creative during the pandemic. I didn't. I was freaked out the entire time, and I barely wrote anything, but I was under contract to write to kind of gather a collection of short stories, and my editor, kept on sending me emails about it, so I had to just produce one and edit it, but really nothing got written during the pandemic. So I do love this book. I love the actual object of it because this is a detail from my mother-in-law's painting that is in our living room. If I had a screen, I could show you the whole thing, but I don't. And I love it too because my daughter Eloise took the photograph, and then my daughter Calla did all of the little drawings that are under each of the titles of the stories. And so like Creature has these little fins. And she came up with that idea in the pandemic, more creative than I was, and thought that we should just have little drawings, because she did the geese for Writers and Lovers, and she came up with that idea, and I just love it so much. Okay, sorry. This is my first event, so, a little discombobulated. So it's a short story collection, and everybody's saying that it's, I'm doing something new, but in fact, like most writers, I started out writing short stories actually in high school. And I had this really fabulous, fabulous teacher, Mr. Paulus. I don't know if you're watching, but I took his class junior year and senior year, each for a semester, and his whole thing was that we had to have a 3.5-page short story on his desk every Monday morning by 8 o'clock. And then we would all critique each other's during the week in writing, and then we'd also read them and discuss them in class. And so I got a lot of my 10,000 hours just in high school. And then I kept writing them in college and in grad school. And then at the end of graduate school, I was completely broke. And I'd heard, someone had said that if you sell a book, you get more money if you write a novel. So instead of writing a collection of short stories, I decided to mush 2 of my favorite short stories together into a novel. And so that's what I did with The Pleasing Hour. And you can kind of tell I was a short story writer because if you read The Pleasing Hour, every chapter is like a short story. It has the same kind of arc. And I hadn't really learned how to leave a cliffhanger, at the end of a, not that I have a lot of cliffhangers, but at the end of a chapter and, that kind of thing. But nowadays, I write short stories when I'm just stuck, when the novel is just not going well, or it's psychologically taking too much of a toll on me, or I just need some kind of a break. I can always tell a novel idea from a short story idea because the novel ideas come along and they just knock me over onto the ground. And I'm like, no, that's too much. I'm not going to do that. No way. But short stories, they kind of float in, on a tiny little sentence. Literally one of these stories was written because I ran into somebody at Flatbread Pizza down the road. Somebody, like a kid I hadn't seen since I was 15 years old. And he just said this one line about his life in the course of maybe a 3 or 4 minute conversation with him. And I held on to that for many years. And then one day it just came out in the first paragraph of a short story, that's called When in the Door Dawn. But story ideas seem just to kind of be all sweetness and light and easy. and they're kind of playful, and I feel like I can really have fun with them. There's no obligation. I haven't been working on them for 2 years and feeling like I have to finish no matter what. And I've been thinking about fun lately and writing, and I chose this life so that I could enjoy what I do. And short stories really, really are fun. Novels come with with more baggage. I feel like the short stories just kind of like come on the wind, and they're just they're kind of more like dalliances or flirtations, whereas the novel is just a big kind of difficult marriage. Not that I feel that way about our marriage, honey. So, like, I remember I wrote Hotel Seattle when I was on a long break from Father of the Rain, and that was a really, really difficult book to write, and I just couldn't handle it emotionally for a while, and then I started writing Hotel Seattle, which is like so much darker than Father of the Rain, but somehow I like got that out of my system in some weird way. And then the last story in the collection, Man at the Door, I wrote that when I was nursing my second child, Eloise, and I had all of these like pillows all around my desk, and I would like get her all adjusted and everything, and just hope that she could just fall asleep for like a half an hour and 45 minutes so I could just write a little bit of The English Teacher, the book I was working on at the time. And when that kind of went badly, I started writing that story, Man at the Door, which was all about like the frustration of trying to figure out how to have kids and write at the same time and not fail kind of at both things. And that story and Timeline and Creature are kind of, I think of them as sort of the three pillars of the collection, because they're all about narrators who become writers, and kind of at different phases of their life. Like one's 14 and one's in her maybe mid-20s, and another is almost 40. And I think those stories kind of helped prepare me to write Writers and Lovers. I was kind of practicing writing about what it's like to write about writing in some way or another. So, but I'm going to read you from a very, very, very abridged version of the title story, 5 Tuesdays in Winter. It is a kind of a bookseller love story, which is a little niche genre I seem to dabble in quite a bit. I don't know why. And it's really kind of exciting to try to read a short story after years of doing like the beginning of a novel. So this really will have a beginning, middle, and ending. So you gotta just kind of get comfy, and I'm just gonna tell you a story, and then I'm supposed to sit over there and answer any questions that you have. So you can start thinking about the questions now. Okay. 5 Tuesdays in Winter. And the drawing is a little, oh my God, I'm blanking, clothespin. Mitchell's daughter, who was 12, accused him of loving his books but hating his customers. He didn't hate them, he just didn't like having to chat with them or lead them to very clearly marked sections. If they couldn't read signs, why were they buying books? While they complained that nothing was arranged by title. He would have liked to have a bouncer at the door, a man with a rippled neck who would turn people away or quietly remove them when they revealed too much ignorance. His daughter loved the customers. She sat behind the counter at the cash drawer every Saturday, writing up receipts in an illegible imitation of his own microscopic hand and chatting like an innkeeper. She was too tall and too sophisticated for a Maine preteen. She made him uneasy. She had recently learned the word reticent and used it on him constantly. "Isn't he the most reticent person you've ever met?" she asked Kate, his only other employee. "Maybe not the most," Kate said, not looking up from her pricing. That's enough, Paula, he said. Then, feeling an unexpected pulse of blood to his cheeks, fled to the stockroom in the back. Mitchell had good ears, and just before he shut the door behind him, he heard Kate's gentle reprimand. I think as a rule, people don't like to be spoken of in the third person. He'd hired Kate 3 months ago. She'd recently moved to Portland from San Francisco for a man named Lincoln. They lived in a small apartment in Bayside. On their answering machine, Lincoln sounded high-strung and full of anticipation, as if he only expected good news after the beep. Despite her strong resume, Kate had unexpected gaps in her knowledge of books. She had never read The Leopard or The Go-Between. She had never even heard of Machado de Assis. Once, he overheard a customer ask how many lines were in a sestina, and she didn't know. She was a reader. She borrowed and returned as many as 10 books a week, but not a speller. On the dupe sheet, she wrote J. Austen, spelled wrong, and F. Dostoevsky, also spelled wrong. At the end of the day, when she stapled the credit card receipts to the ticker tape total, she didn't always align the edges evenly. She had let the mechanical pencils run out of lead. She had thin, sometimes dry lips that she picked at when she was thinking deeply and that she would have liked to kiss. Wanting to kiss Kate was like wanting a larger savings account for Paula's college education, or one of those infallible computerized postal scales for mail orders. It was a persistent, irritating, useless desire. He had been on 2 dates since Paula's mother left. The first one, over 5 years ago now, had been a setup, a friend of a friend. They'd gone to an Italian restaurant for pasta puttanesca. She'd picked out all of her capers and left them on the lip of her bowl, explaining that she was allergic to shellfish. Then she'd wanted to talk about his first wife's departure. The story, his college buddy Brad coming to visit from Australia and leaving 2 weeks later with a box of live lobsters and Mitchell's wife, seemed to arouse her. He couldn't bear to take her out again and lost a mutual friend as a result. Thankfully, others had left him alone. He hadn't been devastated when his wife walked out. People vanished. It had been happening all his life. His mother died when he was 6, his father 9 years later. His best friend from childhood, Aaron, had found a lump on his back. Mitchell himself had spotted it on the beach, and he was dead by Labor Day. Even his favorite customer, Mrs. White, had died within a few years of the shop's opening. Mitchell stood at the stockroom's one window and watched 3 gulls flap restlessly above the harbor. Thick, broken slabs of ice the size of mattresses had been pushed to the shore by the tide. Out farther, beyond the frozen crust, the open water shimmered a luminous summer blue. In these kinds of cold spells, everything seemed confused. Even the gulls overhead seemed lost. Later that afternoon, Paula said, "Kate speaks Spanish." Kate demurred from where she was shelving, but Paula overrode her. "She does. Did you know that, Dad?" "Mm-hmm." He was going through a mildewed carton a student had just brought in. They were good books, without writing or highlighting on any page. But the bottom edge of nearly every one had a pen and ink drawing of a hairy testicle. "That's my icon in my frat," the student said. I know what it is." Mitchell was sharp, even for Mitchell. Paula glowered. She was trying to train him to be more forgiving of his patrons. That was her campaign ever since she'd grown tall, learned words like reticent, and found him flawed. After the frat boy had gone, Paula said, "I was thinking, Kate could help with my Spanish conversation." Kate approached the counter as if she were a customer. "I'm not a teacher. I just lived in Peru for a couple of years." "Are you fluent?" He could see from her face that it was a rigid question. "By the time I left, I could say pretty much anything I wanted, but it's been 6 years now." She would have been living in Peru when his wife left. He hoped, with an uncomfortable swell of feeling, that Kate had been happy there, that if his and Paula's life had been redirected like the course of a river, she had been the recipient of those higher waters. Full of this fervent thought, he headed, for a reason he'd forgotten, to anthropology. Paula found him there, staring blankly at the spines on the shelf. "She said she could come on Tuesday evenings. Can she?" "If you think it'll help." "I've told you, Mr. Gamero never lets us speak." He did not say that she'd never mentioned this before. To the store, Kate wore faded, untucked shirts and jeans slashed at the knee. He was often tempted to tease her, tell her that just because she sold used books she didn't have to wear used clothes, but he thought she might snap back with a crack about the pittance he paid her, so he refrained. To the first Spanish lesson, however, Kate walked up the path to his door in wool pants the color of cranberries. Tuesday was her day off. Perhaps she'd had a late lunch downtown with Lincoln. Worse, she might have had a job interview. It was an easy thing to find out. She was the type who could not take a compliment. If he told her that she looked nice, she'd give the reason instead of saying thank you. But he was the type who could not give a compliment, so he just said hello and let her in. Paula came flying out of her bedroom and dragged Kate back down the hallway. The door clicked shut, and he heard no Spanish, just peals of laughter for the next half hour. He'd planned to do some paperwork before starting dinner, but when he sat down at his desk, he pulled out Kate's application instead. 2/14/68, just as he'd remembered. She was well into her 30s, plenty old enough to be Paula's mother. So what was she doing in there, giggling like a 7th grader? Her birthday was coming up, on Valentine's Day, no less. Maybe she'd quit before then. She might expect a gift, or he might want to give her a little something, and she'd take it the wrong way, or Lincoln would. They emerged from Paula's bedroom, flushed and watery-eyed. He quickly slipped the application back in its file. Entonces, nos vemos el sábado, no? Kate said. Sábado? Sí. They passed his desk without noticing him. Bueno, hasta luego, Paula. She added an extra half syllable to his daughter's name. Adios, Caterina. They kissed on both cheeks, as if in Paris. He waved from his chair, not wanting to break the flow with clunky English. When she came to her house the next Tuesday, she wrote down a slip of paper on a bank receipt he saw later that stated that she had $57.37 in her account from her coat pocket with her new phone number. She said she was moving closer to the store. With Lincoln? Paula asked, and Mitchell for once was grateful for her prying. No, Kate said, as if she might say more than didn't. Why not? He has such perfect teeth. Paula read the question on Mitchell's face and said, she showed me pictures of him. Long after she left, he got up from his reading to start supper and realized that the slip of paper was still crushed in his hand. Okay, now I'm skipping a brilliant part that you don't want to miss when you go home. He listened to Kate's new message in the back office when he was out front at the register. Hi, I'm not here. Say something funny and I'll get back to you. But her voice was not hopeful. It was the voice of someone stuck in Maine for no good reason. He hung up before the beep. The only time he ever got any information about her was on Tuesdays and Saturdays. The rest of the week, without Paula, they worked together in the uninterrupted professionalism he'd established the first week of her employment. It was as if she never stood in his living room or giggled in Spanish with his daughter. He often hoped that Paula would bring up Kate's name in the evenings, let something slip about her that he didn't know, but she never did. On the third Tuesday, as Kate was leaving, the phone rang. Paula ran to answer it. It was for her, of course, so Mitchell walked Kate to the door alone. She was dressed up again. She had put her coat on carefully so as not to wrinkle her soft ivory shirt. She had thin, straight hair that she'd probably complained about, as Paula had about hers, all her life, but that was clean and shiny and soft-looking. Again, he wanted to say how nice she looked, but instead said that he hoped she was keeping a careful record of her tutoring hours. She nodded and said she was, and told him he didn't have to keep reminding her. He was embarrassed. It was his default line. It came out of his mouth when he wanted to say other things to her. He watched her walk to her car, which during the lesson had received a light coating of snow. He wondered if she'd brush off all the windows or just the front and back. She didn't do any of them. She just got into the car, put on the wipers, and without looking sideways to see him standing unconcealed at the window, drove away. Kate has a date, Paula said, catching him in the act of watching her car disappear around the corner. Lincoln? He asked hopefully, more comfortable with an old rival than a new one. They're over, with some guy she met at the store. My store? She just said tienda, but I think so. She told you this in Spanish? That's why she's here, isn't it? See, Mitchell ventured uneasily. The next day, he told Kate she'd have to start addressing postcards for the sale he had every April. I don't mind at all, she said, but you do know it's only the 1st of February. He remembered her approaching birthday and the dilemma about Valentine's and said, there are over 1,000 to send out, so we should get started on it. He set her up in his office in the back and waited on the thin stream of customers himself. Call if you need help, she'd said before he shut her in. I will. But he knew, even if there was a line 10 deep, he wouldn't call. Around 2, a young man in a dark green parka came up to the counter. Mitchell knew he was going to ask for Kate, and when he did, he explained that she was busy at the moment. He was careful not to indicate in which direction she was busy. Unperturbed, the man asked where the art section was, and then slowly made his way toward it, lingering in the new arrival bin, the poetry shelves, mythology, psychology, before arriving at art. If he pulled out a book, he replaced it exactly as it had been, flush with the other spines and the edge of its shelf, just as Mitchell liked them. But he had bad posture and snarls in his hair. He could see Kate looking at her watch as she came out of his office. He couldn't think of any way to keep her from coming forward. She looked down all the aisles until she found him. "Hey," Mitchell heard her say. "How are you doing?" A little disoriented, she flexed her hand, the one that had been addressing flyers for the past 5 hours. Her friend didn't ask why, and Mitchell was pleased that he shared this information with Kate alone. "Let's go," she said. Mitchell's spirits plummeted. She hadn't mentioned leaving early. She had to stay until 6. She came around the corner to get her coat and scarf. "I'm going to grab something at Westy's. Want anything?" He'd forgotten all about lunch. "No," he said, even though he was suddenly starving. "Only mushroom soup." It was a very small joke they had. Once, about 4 years ago, Westy's had served for one day the most delicious mushroom soup he'd ever tasted. They'd never offered it again, but he'd never stopped looking on the specials board every time he went in. Occasionally, he put in a request, but the teenager at the register clearly had no say over soups. The edges of Commercial Street were covered in a thick, lumpy layer of ice, and he watched them cross it slowly without touching. But they were talking a lot. Blue puffs came out of their mouths at the same time. They opened the door to Westy's and disappeared. They'd probably eat at one of the booths. He couldn't very well complain if once in the 3 months that she'd been working there, she ate her lunch out instead of bringing it back. There was a couple in the far room whispering in fiction. He'd been pricing a stack of books he'd just bought from a composer, but now that Kate was gone, he'd lost his concentration. He went down the aisle her friend had chosen and pulled out one by one the books he'd looked at. Each one was a decent book and a sea, he acknowledged with familiar shame, of mediocre books. He would have liked to have an intensely intellectual section. No confessional poetry, no mass-market psychology, no coffee table crap. But as it was, business was precarious. Most intellectuals were like the composer, selling, not buying. A few days ago, a woman had come in with swatches of fabric and asked him to find her books only in those colors. Last week, a man had been looking for War and Peace, and when Mitchell explained that he was temporarily out of anything by Tolstoy, the man asked if he had it by anyone else. It was a terrible time for books. "Hey, where are you?" She pulled on his sleeve. "I got it. Mushroom soup." She held up 2 containers. She was smiling as wide as he'd ever seen. Her nose was red and dripping and beautiful. "It better be as good as you promised." Hadn't she already eaten? Where was the guy in the green coat? How much did he owe her? Questions swarmed but stayed behind the tight knot in his throat. There was always one stool behind the counter and another that he used to prop open the door in summer, which now stood by the coat rack nobody ever used. He'd once wanted the store to be a homey place, the sort of place where you came in and hung up your coat and stayed a while, but it never had been. He'd never given any customer the impression that he wanted them to stay a while. Kate found this other stool and dragged it back around so that the 2 stools were now side by side with a cup of mushroom soup on the counter in front of each one. She took a sip. Her eyes closed. "I would wait 4 years for this soup," she said. He felt as if he would burst. He'd read about this feeling in novels, but he was sure he'd never experienced it. Meeting his wife had brought him pleasure, or a sort of relief, the mystery of whom to spend his life with solved, or so he thought. But he'd actually been fairly content before he met her, talking on the phone with Aaron, eating tuna in his little room, reading from the stacks of books borrowed from the store he now owned. Mitchell wished his cup of soup would never end. They took a long lunch. Customers, as always, were irritating and disruptive. They were worse in this kind of weather. There was a focus that went out of people's eyes. They often forgot what they were looking for and stalled motionless in the aisles. When an elderly woman finally made it out the door, Kate grunted, imitating the way he had responded to her gratitude for finding her a book. "It was Middlemarch," he explained, "which is a great book." "I know it's a great book." He was aware of how much like Paula he sounded when he whined. But shouldn't she have read it by now? She's only 137 years old. She could be reading it for the 137th time, or she could be giving it to her granddaughter or her great-granddaughter. She seemed amused, entirely uninterested in changing him. He knew it was like that at first with anyone. He also knew it might mean that she didn't care about him at all. He tried to think of what it really was that had bothered him about the old woman. For once in his life, thought turned instantly to speech before he could stop it. "I miss Mrs. White." Kate looked up from her soup. An old woman who used to come in here. What was she like? Mitchell hadn't thought about the actual Mrs. White in a long time. When he thought about her now, it was just a feeling, not a person, just a deep longing. He hadn't known her very well. At ease, she used to say to him when she came in. She'd sit on the hard pink chair in science reading Stephen Jay Gould. They'd shared a laugh once when a girl, a few years older than Paula, moved swiftly through the store to the picture of Thomas Pynchon that hung on the back wall and burst into tears. It was the only picture of Pynchon available then, and not many people had ever seen even that, a reproduction of his high school yearbook photo, teeth like a donkey's. The only person who should cry over that picture is his mother, Mrs. White had said. Kate allowed him his silence. She didn't try to reframe the question or ask another. Mrs. White would have done the same thing. What was she like? She was like you, he realized, watching Kate scrape out the last sip of soup with a plastic spoon. She was like you, he said, incredulous. The following day, he couldn't bear her to be so far from him and told her, at the risk of her finding more dates, that she didn't have to spend more than an hour a day addressing flyers. Just before closing, a customer came up to the counter and asked if they were related. "You two have the exact same kind of eyes," he told them. He was drunk, and the comment was preposterous. Kate had warm, thick-lidded brown eyes, and his were a narrow, suspicious green. The man didn't have a coat, and they watched him lurch away in the frozen air. They were careful not to look at each other's eyes. It was only yesterday, the day of the mushroom soup, but it was already far away. Mitchell comforted himself with the thought of Saturday, the day after next, when Paula would be there with them. But that night, she told him that she had play practice in the morning. She had been cast as Rooster in Annie, and that her friend Holly had invited her over afterwards. Once he recovered from that blow, he saw on his calendar that the 14th of February fell on a Tuesday, the 5th Tuesday of Spanish lessons. Okay, now I have to skip over the brilliant and funny and poignant Maine Mall scene. A big Maine Mall scene, but sorry, you're going to have to read that at home. But basically, he's like, what are we gonna get her for her birthday? And anyway, he says a brooch, and Paula says, "What is a brooch?" And he's like, "It's like a sparkly pinny thing." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And they go to the mall, and they end up buying her a brooch. Okay, and now we're on the 5th Tuesday, so we're getting close to the end. His wife had left because, she claimed, he was locked shut. She said the most emotion he'd ever shown her had been during a heated debate of her use of a comma in a note she'd left him about grocery shopping. There was no reason why anything would be different, why he would be able to make anyone happier now. He was the same person. He'd always been the same person. He marveled at how in books people looked back fondly to remembered selves as if they were lost acquaintances. But he'd never been anything but this one self. Perhaps it was because physically there'd been little change. He'd lost no hair, gained no weight, grew no beard. He'd read a great deal in the past 20 years, but nothing that threatened his view of the world or his own minuscule place within it. Still, on the 5th Tuesday, as Mitchell made dinner during the lesson, the lasagna noodles quivered in his hands as he placed them in the pan, nervous as a schoolgirl. He wondered where that expression came from, for he'd never seen Paula ever behave this way. Nervous as a 42-year-old bookseller was how the saying should go. Kate had arrived with a small heart-shaped box of chocolates, which he'd set on the table in the living room. He'd been so startled by the gift, he hadn't taken in the rest of her, and now he couldn't picture her in Paula's room, sitting at the foot of the bed where they always sat. He'd often seen the indentation after she'd gone. Every now and then, as he went about preparing dinner, Mitchell glanced through the open doorway at the box of chocolates. He was just putting the lasagna in the oven when Kate flew by. "Where are you going?" he said, unable to conceal his horror as she flung her coat over her shoulders without bothering to fit her arms in the sleeves and reached for the door. "I'll be right back." The door slammed shut, and he heard her holler from the walkway, "She'll be fine." He went to his daughter's room. The door was open, but she wasn't in it. On her quilt on the bed was a dark red stain and a few pale streaks. Her bathroom door was shut. He stood in silence before it. "I'm okay, Dad." She sounded like she was hanging upside down. "You sure?" He couldn't control the wobble in his voice. "Kate's gone to get some stuff." He actually already had stuff in his bathroom. He'd bought it for her years ago. "That's good," he said. Kate's choices would be better. He felt pleased that he was not overreacting, and he knew right away what had happened, and he hadn't called an ambulance. Then he looked down and saw the blood up close. He was holding the quilt in his arms. He didn't remember taking it off the bed. It was a quilt his mother had made, and he'd slept beneath as a child. The stains and streaks seemed like warnings. Soon Paula would begin complaining that he didn't understand her, didn't appreciate her, didn't love her enough, when in fact he loved her so much his heart often felt shredded by it. But people always wanted words for all the things that roiled inside you. "How do you feel?" he ventured. "All right, kind of weird." "Your mother used to get terrible cramps," he said into the crack in the door. He waited for the clutch that came with talking about her, like someone had grabbed him by the chest hair. "She got headaches sometimes, too. She took extra iron. We probably still have some. They're green in a white bottle." He waited, but the clutching feeling never came. And she had bullet births. She had a bullet birth when you were born, 35 minutes, I think. We barely made it to the hospital. Not that you want to be thinking about that right now. Sweat prickled his scalp. "Shut up," he told himself. One time she was wearing these white pants, and, "Do you miss her, Dad?" "No." He was astonished by the truth of it. "I don't either anymore. I feel like I should miss her. All I really remember is her walking me to school and holding my hand and giving me big hugs at the door. But I always knew the minute she turned her back, I was out of her mind completely. She wasn't like you. I knew you were thinking of me always." She was revising now, creating new memories out of what she was left with, but his eyes stung anyway. When Kate came back from the pharmacy, he retreated to the kitchen. He could hear her coaching Paula, first in the bathroom and then through the door. At times, her voice was serious and precise. Other times, they were both laughing. After a long while, she came into the kitchen. She caught him standing there in the middle of the room, doing nothing. She touched the quilt in his arms. "If I run cold water on it now, it won't stain." I'll do it." He went down the narrow back hallway to the laundry room with the big basin, and she followed. He never expected her to follow. He turned on the faucet. She held the quilt up and fed the stained parts to him slowly. They had to wash it bit by bit, wringing out one part before starting on another. He wished, as in a fairy tale, a magic spell had been placed on the cloth so it would never end, and they could spend the rest of their lives right here, washing and wringing. "You may have to undo some stuff I told her while you were gone." I babbled on about iron supplements and pregnancy and probably scared the lights out of her. You babbled? "I thought you were the most reticent man in the world." "Every 42 years or so I babble." She still had her coat on. It must have started snowing again. Melted flakes glinted like stars all over her. He heard the timer buzz, then the oven door squeak open. They hung the quilt on the fishing line he'd strung up across the room years ago. When they were done, he could do nothing but look at her. She looked carefully back. Paula called them to dinner, but they made no move toward the kitchen. "Why do you think," he asked her, "that man said we had the same eyes?" Maybe he saw something similar in them. Like what? Fear? She looked away. He'd forgotten how disappointing these conversations could be. Desire? She added quietly. Love, he thought. It would come out soon enough. Words and feelings were all churned up together inside him, finding each other like lost parts of an atom. He didn't try to push them apart or away. He let them float in the new fullness in his chest. She brought her hand to his face. It wasn't the face other women had touched. The skin wasn't the same. His nerve endings had multiplied. He could feel each one of her fingers, their different sizes and temperatures. His stomach made a long, slow twist in anticipation of all that his lips would feel. He pulled her close, but Paula came around the corner then, and they jumped back. His daughter, however, was grinning. She took them each by the arm and led them to dinner. She'd lit a candle and poured apple juice into wine glasses. She'd put the heart of chocolates by his place. Lasagna sizzled in the center of the small table, and Kate was smiling, and Mitchell felt, if only for this moment in his kitchen, if only for this one winter evening, that he might not need a never-ending spell after all. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you, Lily. So if folks have questions, I'm going to walk over to you and hold the microphone, because I imagine we've got a curious audience. So if you raise your hand, I'll come to you. I see? Yeah.
I have two questions. The first is, what are you reading right now? And the second is, it sounds like you're a procrastinator, so what are your tricks for getting moving when you're in that funk?
Oh, I didn't quite hear the second one, sorry.
Sounds like you're a procrastinator like lots of us in terms of getting your writing done and finishing things. So what do you do when you're really stuck? How do you find your way out of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What I'm reading right now is something called The Wrong End of the Telescope by Rabi Almadine, and it's about I'm not really sure because I just started it yesterday, but it's about somebody on Lesbos in Greece working with aid workers and also with refugees who are coming in from Africa. And I'm really curious about it. It's gotten rave reviews, and I'm really excited about it. We actually have the same editor, and so he kind of feels like some sort of sibling in some way. And then in terms of getting stuck and how to get unstuck and kind of get writing again, I always find that I try to force it for a while, and then when I feel like I am not getting anywhere, I kind of stop writing and do things that inspire me and replenish me. And the big thing is just to start reading and instead of writing. So during my work time, I'll make a nice big cup of tea and I'll take a book that I really, really want to read. And then if that doesn't work, if that book isn't doing it for me, then I try another one and another one. But I just kind of just really, I find that reading is so inspiring, and I get all kinds of ideas that have nothing to do with what I'm reading. But there's something that happens in my head that starts triggering memories or ideas and concepts. I don't know why it is, but reading really helps. And so I try to just have a pencil nearby that I can write in the back of the book that I'm reading any ideas, and then I try to get it into a notebook and then onto the computer if I can, just so I have those ideas, and I might not come back to it for years, but at least it's there. And I don't know, I figured it out kind of with the help of a therapist one time when I was just so stuck on my second book, and having kids and really confused about how to do it all, and she taught me about replenishing and just giving myself permission to just kind of relax, and take down the pressure. So that's kind of what I do. Deshi?
Take a mic. Thank you for that reading, Lily. That was so great. I'm so excited to read the book.
Oh, thank you.
And you said something that has already stuck in my head, and so I noted the page. You said, he marveled at how in books people look back fondly to remembered selves as if they were lost acquaintances. And I'm interested in if you could talk about what it was like revisiting some of these stories written from your previous selves, and what it was like editing and getting reacquainted with, this is your voice, but this is also your voice when you were 20, or this is your voice when you were having children, and what it was like to time travel and how much reverence you had for the younger voice, and how much you felt you wanted to leave it alone, or how much you wanted to add what you've learned over the, couple decades of writing. So I just want to talk about that experience.
Yeah, thank you. It was weird. And there's one story in there that I really didn't want to be in there because I just felt like it's just not my favorite. But my editor loves that story, and I will not tell you what it is. But I felt like it was just a little too early, a little, But the rest of them, weirdly, I don't know. I started thinking about this yesterday. I don't know if have I grown as a writer? I'm not really sure. That's kind of an old story, and I don't know. I think what I see is they got longer and they got more novelistic. Before I was writing very tight little short stories, and like the first one, Creature, is one of the most recent ones. And that you feel like could turn into a novel at any moment. It's like 43 pages or something, and it definitely has more of a novelistic expansiveness, and I don't know. I wasn't really bothered by the page number anymore. I feel like when I was younger, I used to do that thing where you write a paragraph, and then the next day you go back and you edit that paragraph, and you just write it very, very slowly over the course of months. Just every day I sit down with the story and and start from the beginning. And then once I started writing novels, I realized how inefficient that was, and I just I kind of told myself when I took that break to write Hotel Seattle and to write When in the Dordogne, I told myself that I was going to write a short story a day. And so I started one, and it took me a week, and then I wrote the other, and it took me a week. But I got it. I was just like, I'm just going to get it down. I'm going to stick with the momentum and not with the super polished, and just go with the energy of it. And that was very, very useful to get that. And I think you can feel that in those stories that I shifted a little bit. Thank you for the question, Desi. Yes, Caroline.
I'm just curious about the process of selecting the stories for this book, and I don't know how many you were looking at or if there's some connection between some of them. I'm fascinated with the process of putting short stories in a book, and and I don't know if if there's a genre that you'll continue in now that you've sort of looked at all. I don't know. I'd just love to hear about that.
Yeah.
That process. I don't know much about it.
Thank you. Well, when I first said that I was going to put together a collection of short stories, I told my editor I had 22. And I think she was maybe a little overwhelmed by that number. And as I really started reading them over, I realized, okay, that one's not really finished, and that's not really finished, and I really got to work on that. And the pandemic had happened, and so as I said, had it been a different time, I think I could have there's one story that I really wanted to finish, and I couldn't do it. My mind was not there. And so little by little, I think maybe I ended up sending her maybe 13 or something, maybe even 12, I don't know. And then, and so it went from being kind of like a big collection to being a little delicate collection of 10. And then we had to talk. Then we had to kind of figure out the order of the stories tells a story, right? And so what's the kind of story we want to tell, or what's the arc? And also there are 4 stories, I think, with male narrators. There are a couple with adolescent narrators. You kind of want to break those up, and then there are the 3 with the writer narrators. And do we want to make a triptych, at the end with those, or do we want to kind of put them as pillars, which is what we ended up doing, one at the beginning, one at the end, and one in the middle. And it was really fun to play around. I mean, for me, it was all a whole new experience because I have just been writing these novels. And so every question was kind of fun. And also the editing was, a lot of them had been published already, so they were already sort of polished, and we didn't really want to alter them too much, given that they had been published. And that was so fun and easy too, and so it was really, really enjoyable. Yeah. Caroline.
Hi. So it sounds like a lot of these short stories are just, at the very least, a bit autobiographical, and I'm curious.
Can you? Do you mind just? I can't quite hear you.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
No worries. I'm just curious about. It feels like a lot of these short stories are, to a degree, autobiographical, and I'm just curious if that's an isolated thing with short stories, or does that leak into your other work? And to whatever degree it does, how do you separate taking those personal experiences and differentiating them from what you want to make up in your own head?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say, Creature, for example. I did go and babysit at a kind of a big house in my town, like a really like one of the fanciest houses in our town. So I stole that, completely. But everything that happens there did not happen to me. That's all. So I'll take something from my life, but I would write nonfiction if I were just writing autobiographically. There's something very flat for me about when I try to write about my own experiences without being able to do anything fictionally. And it really kind of takes off when I can play, and I can just take maybe a situation that I know, or like I said, the line that I heard at Flatbreads, I know nothing about that person's family situation or anything. I created this whole thing. But that line got me there, I just sometimes just a little tiny something from life that I would never have been able to think of that line. And when he said it, I could think about all the rest of it. And so most of those stories are like that. There isn't really anything, I think, that I can really point to that is really what happened to me. It's more, I think I said this last time I was here, that for me, it's like a big Yahtzee cup, I put in my own experience and everything that I've read and my imagination, and I kind of just shake it all up, and it comes out a different combination every time. So I'm not, and also when I'm in that state, I don't know the writers in here if you feel this way too, but when I'm in that state of creation, I am never thinking, this happened to me, this didn't happen to me, this is from sometimes it's almost like dreaming, and you wake up and you're like, oh, there's the Tin Man. He's actually the guy who works in the barn kind of thing. I'm always surprised. I'm not thinking that actually was something from my life, and then I can remember, oh, yeah. But that's all twisted around in some way. So that's kind of how it works for me.
Lily, we have a question from an online audience.
Oh, I like that.
I know.
Hello, online people.
I know. Hello, online people. We asked them to email me questions. So here's the question. One of my favorite stories in this collection is When in the Dardon. Can you tell us a little bit about how that story came to be, and does it have an origin story?
Yes, well, that is it. That is that story. Hold on, let me try to get to it. 68. So that story begins, it says, the summer of 1986, the summer before I entered high school, my parents went to the Dordogne for 8 weeks. My father had been sick. And it was thought that France, where he had studied as a young man, would enable his recovery. This is the sentence coming up. Through the university's employment office, my mother hired 2 sophomores to house sit for the time that they would be out of the country. As I came with the house, these 2 college boys were obligated to take care of me, too. So when I was at that pizza place, right down the road there, I ran into that person, and he had said, somehow we got onto the conversation of his parents when he was in high school going to Europe for the summer. And he's like, and they hired 2 college kids to take care of the house. And because I came with the house, they had to take care of me too. And I just remember that so well, kind of walking out, and just that sentence lodged someplace in my imagination, and it just didn't leave. You know, there's so many things that people talk to you about, you know, all day long that you never, ever, ever would remember. But I just thought that was a really, really interesting way of expressing the neglect that you received, you know, as a, you know, probably wealthy teenager. And it just, that character, that teenager, left him, that real life person, and started growing in my imagination. And it was several years before many years probably, 5, 6, 7, before I started, you know, that story just kind of came out of me that week that I was talking about. So that's how that happened. Yeah. Oh, no, you go.
First of all, thank you so much for coming back to the hall.
Oh, thank you all.
It's so nice to be in person.
It is.
Question regarding the short form versus a novel. When you're the novel, is there more? Do you know more where you're going when you're writing a novel versus a short story? Like the short story, do you not know where you're going? Do you not know where the end is as much as a novel, or are they the same to you?
That is such a great question. I've never thought about that before. But I really have no idea in a short story where I'm going. And I think it's because it's okay. It's okay if I don't know, because I can just never see it again, and nobody will know about it, and nobody's waiting for it, and you know. Whereas with a novel, I think I am more prepared, or I don't know. I feel like I have to know something, feel something. I mean, I always say, I often know kind of where I want the character to land emotionally. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I know how I want the character to feel. And in a short story, I don't even know that. And I wonder, you know, if I use short stories sometime to kind of reassure myself that it's okay not to know everything, and it's okay not to plan, and you know, because it really is. That's the fun part. The fun part is just the not knowing and the surprise. I love that more than anything, is, you know, being surprised by where I've arrived. Yeah, thank you for that question. Thank you.
Are any of these short stories stories that you think about developing into a novel? Just hearing you read about Mitchell and Kate, we fall totally in love with them, and it feels like that could be an entire novel, either what came before or what comes next, or however it goes. The same with Creature. It's a fairly long, short story, and it could easily become a book. Are any of these ones, or of the 22 that you started with, that you're thinking, oh, this will become my next novel, or a novel in 10 years?
No. No, I think Creature is probably the only one that I could kind of see doing that with, but I don't. There are short stories for a reason, you know. I came to the end. I don't know why I know what ideas are which, but they come with the form, you know. The form is sort of built into the idea, weirdly. That just is how it works for me. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Hi. Do you ever start a project and just completely abandon it? And if you do, is that difficult? And if you don't, how do you know that the stuck times are just a rough patch and not the end of the project?
Yeah, that is a great question, and it's so hard to start something and not finish it. I really don't like that, but yes, I've done that a number of times. Between my first and my second novel, I started something, I wrote 60 pages, and it fizzled. It just didn't come to life, you know? It just didn't, and I had to accept that. And then between Euphoria and Writers and Lovers, it happened twice, where I did tons of research for something, and I got 20 pages in and just had nothing more. I didn't see it anymore. And then the next time I tried that, I did tons of research, and I got 21 pages in, and then my mom died. And then for that reason, I couldn't go back to it. And I certainly, I have a ton of short stories that I get a paragraph or 2 paragraphs in. I will say that I think what happens is when I get, say 200 pages into a book, I always say that 2/3 of the way through, I have that same feeling. Like, I'm not going to make it to the end. I'm just not going to make it to the end. And I have to remember that and accept that and just keep going. But there's always a moment for me of just complete despair. But once I've gone 200 pages, I just refuse. I refuse to give up. I will finish it any way I possibly can because I am not abandoning 200 pages. But, 20, 60, I might give up. Thank you.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Such a quiet. Oh, here we go. Hold on.
I feel like everybody's kind of muzzled with their masks on. I'm so glad you guys came. Thank you. Oh, here's Jolie.
Megan's sweating
Jolie
bullets right now.
Gets the last word.
When you have a few minutes to daydream, do you ever see yourself writing in some genre that we wouldn't expect? And if so, what is it? And if so, do you ever see yourself actually doing it?
Yeah, honestly, the only genre I would be really attracted to is songwriting, and like writing my own songs and writing the music and the words, I think would be amazing. But as my daughter knows, we made a pact after we read, what is it called? How to Write One Song? Help me out, Kala. By Jeff. I'm just blanking up here on the stage here. Anyway. Jeff Tweedy. It's such a good book. I can recommend that to everybody in terms of just the creative process. His writing process for writing songs is like exactly the same as mine, and I just nodded throughout the whole book. And anyway, we made a pact that we would each write a song by the 1st of August, I think. And we still haven't delivered our songs. But that is what I would really, really be attracted to. I am writing a, murder mystery right now, so maybe I've already crossed over, but it's still at that stage where, who knows? Who knows if I'll actually get to page 200. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you all so much for coming, and I share in Lily's gratitude of seeing you all here, and we're grateful for your support. We're grateful for your support of Lily and buying books from print and supporting nonprofits like Mechanics Hall and Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance. You have helped sustain us through a really difficult time, and so keep at it, and thank you. Lily's going to stick around and sign some books, and Print has more books for sale, and we look forward to seeing you back in person again soon at Mechanics Hall. So thank you, Lily.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.